They treated me like their personal ATM. Then I secretly recorded them trashing me. Then my brother needed money. I need to get this off my chest, Reddit. I did something drastic. Something I never thought I was capable of. Something that's probably going to make me sound like a terrible person to some of you. But after years of being the family doormat, the ATM, the one everyone takes advantage of, I finally snapped. It all started, I guess, when I was a kid. I was always the responsible one, the good one, the one who got good grades, stayed out of trouble, and generally tried to make my parents proud. My older brother, Ethan, M45, I'm F38, was not. He was the charmer, the rebel, the one who always got away with everything. My parents, especially my mom, adored him. He could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, could do no right. This dynamic continued into adulthood. I got a good job, worked hard, saved my money. Ethan drifted. He bounced from job to job, relationship to relationship, always relying on my parents, and increasingly me, to bail him out. It started small. Hey sis, can you lend me a couple $100? I'll pay you back next week. Narrator. He never did. Then it escalated. My car broke down. Can you cover the repairs? I'm short on rent this month. I need a new suit for a job interview. I always helped. I felt obligated. I felt guilty. I felt like if I didn't, I'd be a bad sister, a bad daughter. My parents reinforced this, of course. Ethan's just going through a rough patch, they'd say. He'll get back on his feet eventually. You're so lucky to be in a position to help. Lucky, right. It wasn't just Ethan, though. It was the whole family. My parents, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. They all seemed to view me as their personal bank. They'd ask for loans, never repaid. They'd borrow things and never return them. They'd expect me to pick up the tab at every family dinner. And they'd always have some excuse, some reason why they couldn't afford it, why I should be the one to pay. And the worst part? They weren't even grateful. They acted like it was my duty to support them, like I owed them something. They'd make these backhanded comments like, "Oh, Olivia can afford it, she's so successful," or "It's nice that someone in the family has their life together." As if my success was somehow a flaw, something to be resented. The resentment simmered for years. I kept telling myself it was family, that I should be generous, that I should be the bigger person. But inside, I was seething. Then came Thanksgiving. Last year, I was hosting as usual. I'd spent days preparing, cooking, cleaning, making sure everything was perfect. My parents, Ethan, his latest girlfriend, Ashley, shockingly seemed nice, and a few other relatives were coming over. I'd recently bought a new laptop, and I was still figuring out all the features. I'd been using it for work, mostly video conferencing, and I'd set up a little home office area in the spare bedroom. That morning, I'd had a quick video call with a colleague, and I'd left the laptop open thinking I'd close the call. I hadn't. The camera and microphone were still on, streaming, to nowhere thankfully, but still recording. Later that day after dinner, while I was in the kitchen doing dishes, because of course I was, I heard my family talking in the living room. At first, it was just normal chatter, but then the conversation shifted. "Honestly, I don't know how Olivia does it," my mom said, her voice laced with that familiar condescending tone. "She's so uptight, so serious. She needs to loosen up." "She's always been like that," Ethan chimed in. "Such a goody two-shoes. Remember in high school when she..." And then they were off, ripping me apart. My personality, my career, my lack of romantic life, even my apartment. They mocked my clothes, my hobbies, my friends. They called me boring, pretentious, materialistic. The irony, and desperate. I stood there, frozen, listening to them tear me down piece by piece. The people who were supposed to love me, support me, be there for me, were talking about me like I was some kind of pathetic alien creature. I wanted to storm in there, confront them, scream at them, but I didn't. I just stood there, listening, letting the hurt and anger wash over me. And then I remembered the laptop. I quietly slipped into the spare bedroom. The little red light was still on, recording. I stopped the recording, saved the file, and went back to the kitchen. I finished the dishes, plastered a fake smile on my face, and pretended like everything was fine. But inside, something had shifted, something had broken, and something had hardened. I didn't say anything to anyone. Not then. I just waited. Update 1. It's been almost a year since that Thanksgiving. A year of simmering resentment. A year of playing nice. A year of pretending like everything was okay. And of course, a year of my family continuing to take advantage of me. The loans kept coming. The requests for favors. The backhanded compliments, the subtle digs. I played along. I smiled. I nodded. I wrote the checks. I lent the money. I offered the help. But inside, I was building a wall, brick by brick. Each request, each insult, each instance of their entitlement, it just added another layer of concrete. And I kept thinking about that recording, that damning, heartbreaking, infuriating recording. I listened to it sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep. It was like picking at a scab, reopening the wound, but it also fueled me. It reminded me that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining things, that my family really did see me that way. Then, about a month ago, Ethan called. He was in trouble, big trouble. "Sis," he said, his voice strained, "I need your help. It's serious." He explained that he and his girlfriend, Ashley, had bought a house. A fixer-upper, he'd called it. But the fixing-up had turned into a money pit. They were drowning in debt. The mortgage was overdue. They were facing foreclosure. And he needed my help. He needed a loan. A big loan. Enough to cover the overdue mortgage payments, pay off some of their other debts, and give them some breathing room. He was asking for almost $50,000. $50,000. He promised he'd pay me back. He swore he'd get his life together. He said it was his only option. I listened. I let him talk. I let him plead. And then I said, "I'll think about it. Come over tomorrow and we can discuss it." He sounded relieved, grateful, hopeful. He had no idea what was coming. The next day, Ethan and his girlfriend came over. They sat on my couch, looking nervous and expectant. I offered them coffee, made small talk, let the tension build. Then I said, "Okay, Ethan, let's talk about this loan." I pulled out my laptop, the same laptop that had recorded that Thanksgiving conversation. I opened the file. I didn't say anything, I just pressed play. The sound of my mom's voice filled the room. "Honestly, I don't know how Olivia does it." Ethan's face went pale. Ashley gasped. I let it play. The whole thing. The insults, the mockery, the contempt. As the recording went on, Ethan's expression shifted. From shock to horror to shame to anger. But not anger at me. Anger at himself. And at our family. When it was over, I closed the laptop. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. "So," I said, my voice calm, "before we talk about this loan, I think we need to talk about this." Update 2. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't argue. He didn't even try to defend himself or our family. He just deflated. Like a balloon that had been slowly leaking air for years and finally gave out. His girlfriend, Ashley, was in tears. She'd had no idea. She'd always thought my family was so nice, so supportive. I don't know what to say," Ethan stammered. I'm so sorry." It was the first genuine apology I'd ever heard from him. I told him I didn't want his apology. I wanted him to understand how much their words, their actions had hurt me, to understand how they'd treated me, not like family, but like an ATM, a doormat, a thing to be used and discarded. He listened. He actually listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make excuses. For the first time in my life, I felt like he was actually seeing me. We talked for hours about our childhood, about our parents, about the family dynamic that had shaped us both, about the pressure he'd felt to be the charming one, the successful one, and how he'd coped with it by constantly needing to be bailed out, about the resentment I'd felt, the burden I'd carried, the constant feeling of being taken for granted. It wasn't easy. There were tears, accusations, moments of anger, but there was also honesty, a raw, painful, necessary honesty. And after a lengthy conversation, he asked me, "So does that mean you won't help? The loan?" "Ethan," I said, looking directly at him, "I am not lending you any money. Not now. Not ever. I don't think you will learn your lesson that way." I told him I was done. Done being the family ATM. Done being the scapegoat. Done being the responsible one who always cleaned up everyone else's messes. He nodded. He didn't argue. He just accepted it. Then, Ashley, Ethan's girlfriend, spoke up. She said she understood. She said she was ashamed of how my family had treated me. And she said she was going to talk to Ethan about getting professional help, both for his financial problems and for his issues. We left it there. No promises, no grand reconciliations. Just a fragile, tentative understanding. Since then, things have been quiet. I haven't heard from my parents. I haven't heard from Ethan, except for a brief text message thanking me for my honesty. But I have heard the rumors. Apparently, the news of the recording and of my confrontation with Ethan has spread throughout the family like wildfire. Some of my relatives are furious with me. They think I was cruel, vindictive, that I should have handled things privately. They're calling me names, spreading gossip, trying to paint me as the villain. Others are silent. I suspect they're feeling a little guilty, a little ashamed. Maybe they're realizing that they too have contributed to the toxic family dynamic. And a few have actually reached out to me to apologize, to say they're sorry for how I've been treated, to say they understand why I did what I did. It's a strange feeling to be both ostracized and validated at the same time. I'm still figuring things out. I'm still processing everything that's happened. I've started seeing a therapist. It's helping. She's helping me understand the family dynamics, the patterns of behavior, the ways in which I've internalized the role of the responsible one. She's helping me set boundaries, to prioritize my own needs, to say no without feeling guilty. I'm not sure what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever fully reconcile with my family. I don't know if I even want to, but I do know this. I'm done. Done being the doormat. Done being the ATM. Done being the one everyone takes advantage of. I'm learning to forgive them, not for their sake, but for mine, to let go of the anger, the resentment, the hurt. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it definitely doesn't mean letting them back into my life to repeat the same patterns. I'm setting boundaries, firm, clear, non-negotiable boundaries, and I'm prepared to defend them. It's a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I feel free, like a weight has been lifted, like I can finally breathe. And that, Reddit, is worth more than any apology, any loan, any amount of money. It's worth more than anything. Update 3. It's been a few weeks since the incident, the Great Thanksgiving tape reveal, as I've started calling it in my head. Dark humor, gotta love it. The silence from my family was deafening at first. I blocked Ethan's number, and I hadn't heard a peep from my parents. I thought maybe they were finally getting the message. I was wrong. The guilt trip started subtly. A text from my mom. Just thinking of you, honey. Hope you're doing okay. Family is forever, you know. Then a phone call. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her voice thick with emotion. Your father and I are just so worried about Ethan. He's not doing well. He's lost. We just want to be a family again. Can't we just put this all behind us? Then the emails. Long, rambling emails about how blood is thicker than water, how everyone makes mistakes, how I was tearing the family apart. My mom even started quoting Bible verses at me, which is hilarious because she hasn't been to church in like 20 years. The guilt tripping escalated. My aunt, Mom's sister, called, telling me I was being selfish and unforgiving. My uncle, Dad's brother, sent me a card with a handwritten note saying he was disappointed in me. Even some of my cousins, who I thought were on my side, started sending me messages, urging me to reconsider and forgive. It was like a coordinated attack, a full court press of guilt and manipulation. And I'll admit, it started to work. I started to question myself. Was I being too harsh? Was I holding on to anger for too long? Was I really tearing the family apart? I talked to my therapist about it. She helped me see that this was classic family systems behavior. The pressure to conform, to maintain the status quo, to keep the peace at all costs. She reminded me that I wasn't responsible for their feelings or for their choices, that I had a right to set boundaries, to protect myself from their toxicity. But it was still hard. The guilt was insidious. It crept into my thoughts, whispered doubts in my ear, made me question my own sanity. Then came the phone call from my dad. He sounded defeated. Your mother's not doing well, he said. She's not sleeping. She's barely eating. She's heartbroken. He went on to describe how Ethan was struggling, how he'd lost his job. Apparently, the fixer-upper house was a disaster, and he'd been spending all his time and energy trying to deal with it, neglecting his work. How he and Ashley, his girlfriend, were fighting constantly. How he was lost and depressed. And then, he said it. The thing I knew was coming. We need your help, Olivia. We need you to forgive Ethan, to forgive your mother, to help us get back on our feet. The help, of course, meant money. He didn't say it outright, but it was implied. The subtext was clear. You have money. We need money. Therefore, you should give us money. I took a deep breath. I reminded myself of everything my therapist had said. I reminded myself of the recording, of the years of disrespect, of the constant taking and the lack of giving. "Dad," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I love you, but I can't do this anymore. I can't keep being the one who fixes everything. I can't keep being the one who sacrifices my own well-being for the sake of family." He sighed. "I understand," he said, but I could hear the disappointment in his voice, the unspoken accusation. We ended the call, and I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that I'd stood my ground, sadness that it had come to this. Update 4. A few weeks ago, something unexpected happened. Something that shifted my perspective, made me see things in a new light. I was going through some old boxes in the attic, looking for some childhood photos. I stumbled across a box of my grandmother's things, my dad's mom. She passed away a few years ago, and I'd inherited some of her belongings. I hadn't really looked through the box before. It was mostly old letters, photographs, trinkets, sentimental stuff. But then I found something different. It was a journal, a small, leather-bound book filled with my grandmother's handwriting. I started reading. At first, it was just ordinary stuff. Daily entries about her life, her family, her thoughts. But then, I came across a series of entries from the 1970s. Entries about my dad and about Ethan's father, my uncle, who died when Ethan was very young. And what I read shocked me. It turned out that Ethan's father had had a problem, a gambling problem. He'd accumulated massive debts, hidden them from his family, and eventually lost everything. Their house, their savings, their future. My grandmother had been devastated. She'd had to work multiple jobs to support her family, to keep them afloat. She'd struggled. She'd sacrificed. She'd done everything she could. And my dad, he'd stepped up. He'd helped his mother, taken care of his younger siblings, shouldered the responsibility that his brother-in-law had abandoned. But here's the thing. My grandmother's journal entries weren't just about the hardship. They were also about the resentment, the anger, the feeling of being taken advantage of. She wrote about how her husband's family had never acknowledged the sacrifices she'd made, how they'd continued to ask for help even after they knew about the gambling problem, how they'd acted like it was her duty to bail them out. Sound familiar? It was like reading my own story, mirrored in the past, a different generation, a different set of circumstances, but the same underlying dynamic, the same pattern of entitlement, of exploitation, of one family member being expected to carry the burden for everyone else. And then I found one entry that really hit me. "I love my family," my grandmother wrote, "but I'm starting to resent them. I feel like they see me as a bottomless well, a source of endless support. They don't see me as a person, with my own needs, my own limits." It was like she was speaking directly to me across the years. Reading that journal changed something in me. It gave me a new understanding of my family, of the patterns that had been passed down through generations. It made me realize that this wasn't just about me. It was about a cycle, a deeply ingrained way of relating to each other. And it made me realize that I had a choice. I could continue the cycle, or I could break it. I could keep being the responsible one, the good one, the one who always gave and never received. Or I could choose a different path. I could choose myself. Update 5. It's been months, I guess, since my last update, since the great family implosion, as I've started to think of it. Things have settled down, not in a happy ending, everyone's friends again kind of way, more in a quiet acceptance of the new reality kind of way. I haven't spoken to my parents since that phone call with my dad. I haven't spoken to Ethan. I've blocked their numbers, unfollowed them on social media. It's strange to be so disconnected from the people who were once such a central part of my life. It's sad sometimes. I miss the good memories, the moments of genuine connection, but I don't miss the drama. I don't miss the guilt trips. I don't miss the feeling of being constantly taken advantage of. I've been focusing on myself, on my work, on my relationships with the people who do support me, who do value me. I've made new friends. I've reconnected with old ones. I've built a life that feels authentic, a life that feels like mine. I've also been thinking a lot about forgiveness. My therapist helped me understand that forgiveness isn't about condoning what happened. It's not about saying, it's okay that you hurt me. It's about letting go of the anger, the resentment, the need for revenge. It's about freeing myself from the burden of carrying that negativity. And I think I'm getting there. I'm not sure I'll ever fully forgive my family. Some wounds run too deep. But I'm learning to accept what happened, to accept that they are who they are, and that I can't change them. I'm learning to set boundaries, to say no without feeling guilty, to prioritize my own needs, my own well-being. I'm learning to let go of the expectation that they'll ever be the family I wanted them to be, and to embrace the family I have, the friends, the loved ones, the people who choose to be in my life, not because they feel obligated, but because they genuinely care. There's no grand dramatic resolution to this story, no happy reunion, no tearful apologies, no magical transformation, just acceptance and a quiet, growing sense of peace. I'm moving on. I'm building a new life, a life that's defined by my choices, my values, my own definition of happiness. And that, Reddit, is enough. It has to be. That's all for this story. I'll be back with another one. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It motivates me to create more content like this.